Bonsoir, buenas tardes, good evening. Bienvenue à cette grande conférence intitulée « Le revenu de base, une innovation sociale pour le XXIe siècle », organisée en partenariat avec le Mouvement français pour un revenu de base et Revenu de base Québec. Bienvenidos a esta gran conferencia intitulada La renta básica en una innovación social por el siglo XXI, organizada en conjunto por el Movimiento Francés por una Renta Básica y Renta Básica Québec. So, welcome to this grand conference entitled Basic Income, a Social Innovation for the 21st Century, organized in partnership with the French Movement for a Basic Income and Basic Income Québec. So, before we start, I would like to thank the organizers of this World Social Forum, who've been doing a great job and made it possible for us to have a great conference on the topic of basic income. So, a big thanks to them. And I'm also very happy to introduce you to our great panel of speakers who come from different countries, so Netherlands, the United States, and Brazil, and also from South Africa. We'll be able to speak with one of our partners from South Africa, who unfortunately couldn't come today. So she made a video we'll be able to watch in a minute. But before we start, I would like to ask you some questions about basic income in order to know a little bit more about your knowledge on the topic. So please raise your hands when relevant. So my first question would be, who among you consider they know well the subject of basic income? Who've been reading about it, talking about it among your friends? All right. So I would say, yeah. Quite a big number. And who among those who think they know quite well the topic of basic income have been knowing about it in the past year? Or less than in 1 year, in this past year, all right? In more than a year? All right. And who has discovered the subject of basic income during the World Social Forum? So in the past days only? Quite a few. I guess you've been coming to our activities, I hope so. And so maybe there's people who didn't know about it at all and just came to this grand conference, maybe got lost. One person, all right. Sorry, but you'll see it's interesting. So yeah, I was asking those questions because that's interesting. We've been knowing a real surge of interest around the topic of basic income in the past year, actually. Since last summer, there's been the decision from the part of the Finnish government to experiment a basic income at the national level. So they will start the pilot next year, so in January 2017. There's going to be a sample of 6,000 people who will be having a basic income for 2 years, and then they will see whether or not they want to implement it at the national level. So this has been helping us to raise awareness around basic income, but there's also been a lot of movements, especially in Europe. I will speak about Europe mainly, but in the Netherlands, maybe Rutger will be able to tell us more a little bit about it. There's been several cities that are going to implement it, hopefully. We're still not confirmed yet. And there's also been a referendum in Switzerland last June on the topic of basic income. They didn't vote in favor of basic income. The percentage of people in favor of basic income was 23% for the yes. But it's still a big improvement because 3 years ago, most of the people didn't know about the subject. So it's a topic that is evolving a lot, and we will be able to talk about it a little more in a minute. So now we are going to watch the video about our partner from South Africa. Her name is Nkateko Chauke, and she's the coordinator of the SADC Basic Income Grant campaign. So, with a background in advocacy and community mobilization, she is currently at the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, working as the coordinator of this campaign for basic income. This project seeks at raising awareness on social protection, including the rollout of a wide basic income grant for all in South Africa. So let's watch a video.
Good day. My name is Nkateko Chauke from South Africa. I represent the Basic Income Grant campaign, which is comprised of a coalition of stakeholders and network partners across the region who share a common goal on eradicating poverty and reducing inequality in the SADC region, as well as promote the rollout of a social protection cash transfers in the form of a basic income grant. I'm so sorry that I couldn't join you today, but I will be engaging in the discussions with you via the internet. I look forward to the discussions and hope that the outcomes of the World Social Forum will have us very energized and committed towards the cause of a basic income grant. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate.
So yes, that's it. We are sorry she couldn't come, but she had a presence today, and she will be able to follow. The conference is also filmed, so she will be able to see what have been the exchanges. So let's go to the speakers we have today. We are going to start with Rutger Bregman. Rutger Bregman is a historian, an author from the Netherlands. He has published 4 books on history, philosophy, and economics. His History of Progress book was awarded the Belgian Liberalist Prize for Best Non-Fiction Book of 2013. The Dutch edition of his new book, Utopia for Realists, A Case for Basic Income, became a national bestseller and sparked a basic income movement that soon made international headlines. So here's the floor.
It already works. Great. Well, let me just start with a few questions, just so that I know what kind of audience I have tonight, and maybe adjust my story a little bit. The first question that I'd like to ask is, who follows the news? I was already quite afraid of that. All right, second question. Who reads a newspaper? Oh, really? Come on. Who watches television? Who watches television every day? This is quite shocking. Okay, last question. Who thinks he or she has been completely brainwashed and has developed an utterly twisted image of human nature and the state of the world? Well, at least you know it. That's something. All right. Well, then I'll adjust my story a little bit. Maybe it's good to start with the biggest lesson of all of world history. I think that's important because I don't think this has been on the news. You must know I've studied history for 5 years at the university. And to save you some time, I can summarize everything I learned in just 5 words. You know, that's just everything I learned over there. The biggest lesson of history, ladies and gentlemen, I mean the biggest lesson of the past 200,000 years is everything used to be worse. That's about it. You know, 5 years of study, but then you really know it. Now, for about 99% of our time on this planet, about 99% of us were poor, stupid, hungry, afraid, sick, and ugly. So that's sort of the natural state of humanity. And it started to change only very recently. about 200 years ago with the Industrial Revolution, of course, in England. And some economists have calculated that in the year 1800, about 94% of all the world population lived in extreme poverty. In 1980, that percentage had dropped to 44%, and nowadays, just a few decades later, it's under 10%. So this is quite an amazing development. The rich or the people that we call poor today in our rich countries, they are actually filthy rich in a historical perspective. I'd like to give one example. In the country where I live, the Netherlands, a homeless person, so I think that's really, you're at the bottom of society, but in the Netherlands, a homeless person receives about 650 euros each month in public assistance. And that's including holiday pay, by the way. I'm not making this up, they get about 7% holiday pay. And now obviously that's not a lot of money. I mean, 650 euros in a country like the Netherlands, it's not enough to live on. But if you adjust for purchasing power and inflation, you'll discover that it's more than the average Dutch person earned in about 1950, and it's 4 times as much as the average Dutch person earned during the glorious golden age, the so-called glorious golden age, when we still ruled the 7 seas, you know, and we're still a very important country. Yes, I know that was a very, very long time ago. Anyway, I think the point is that when historians will look back on our time, they'll wonder what on earth was wrong with all those rich, clean, safe, smart, healthy, and occasionally even beautiful people who thought that their country and the world as a whole was going downhill. And I think they'll have to focus on one explanation. I think they'll focus on the kind of information that we're getting about other people, on the stories that we're telling to each other and about each other. Or in short, I think they'll focus on the news. I think that's the biggest explanation. The news is, and I'm not exaggerating here, it's the most common and dangerous addiction in the world. The global average media consumption nowadays has reached about 500 minutes per day. This adds up to 18 years over a lifetime. And the problem with the news is that it's always about exceptions. So it's always about terrorism, corruption, crises, and it's almost never about the rule. So you never see headlines like, for example, LifeLog, billions of people went to their work and back again today. That doesn't happen. Or at least it does happen, but it's never on the news. And you never see something like breaking news. Child mortality dropped another 0.0000001% today. You know, that's not how the news works. If you're watching a lot of news, at the end of the day, you know exactly how the world is not working. You know, you've also, I think if you watch a lot of news, you'll have a really bleak image of human nature. Because the rule is, and this is never on the news, the rule is that most people are actually pretty nice. Most people are pretty nice, they are creative, and they want to do something interesting with their lives, but it's never on the news. So I think here we have it. The real crisis of our time and of my generation is not so much that we don't have it good. I mean, the real crisis is that we can't come up with anything better. That we base 90% of our laws and of our business model on a misguided view of human nature. And because of that, I think we've lost our collective imagination. We've stopped dreaming. Now, I have written a book about utopias. I think that if you look at history, then you see that every milestone of civilization was once regarded as a utopian fantasy, something that would never come true. Progress, the Irish poet Oscar Wilde once wrote, is the realization of utopia. So I think it's really important that we relearn how to think utopian, that we open the windows of thought once again, and that we ground our new visions in a much more realistic image of human nature, that we are fundamentally creative and social beings. We want to make something of our lives. And this is exactly where the idea of universal basic income comes in. When I first wrote about it, this was in October 2013, most people thought that I was talking about the basic income of the banker, on top of which you receive is always bonuses. So many people didn't know what I was talking about. But now, just 3 years later, and I really find it amazing that it's only 3 years, there are 20 municipalities in the Netherlands that want to experiment with some form of basic income. And it probably doesn't surprise you that this didn't start in the newsrooms of our national media or because a politician said something on television. You know, this all happened bottom up. So it all happened with people on a local level coming together around a new idea that goes right through the old political division between the left and the right. And sure, when you believe what the news is telling you every day, then you're probably not a fan of basic income. I mean, it's obvious. You probably think that people will waste it on their money on drugs and alcohol, and that it will turn them into lazy scroungers. And there's probably no amount of evidence to the contrary that's going to change your mind. Money for nothing for many people is just not right. And that's why I've come to believe that the most important objection to basic income, I don't think it's technical in nature, I don't really think it's economic, I think it's fundamentally moral. So the majority of people still buy into the notion, the 20th century idea, that you have to work for your money. And many of us still use a very narrow definition of what work is. And this is, again, it's a definition that's all over the news. So every time you hear about the GDP that's growing or not, or how many jobs have been added in a month, every time that happens, you're confronted with this old definition of work. In this definition, only the paid labor counts that we do for employers, and not the caring for our children, not the caring for our elderly, no volunteers work. It all doesn't count. It's not considered as real work. So I think that if we want to convince people that basic income truly is an idea whose time has come, then I think it all starts with convincing them that we need to fundamentally rethink what all these central concepts are, what work is, what wealth is, and what growth is. We need to show that people don't have to be forced into work, that almost everyone wants to do something, wants to work, and that they want to do something with their lives, but that to make their own choices, that we need to give them the means. And that's also why I think that in the end, basic income is mostly about freedom. It's about real, genuine freedom. Now, I must say, of course, we have all kinds of freedom in the West, like freedom of expression and freedom of religion and freedom of association, and these are really important. You know, we should take pride in all these accomplishments and this liberty that generations before us has fought for and won. But let me ask you a simple question. What is the value of free speech when you've got nothing worthwhile to say? You know, what's the value of something like freedom of association when we no longer feel any sense of association? I mean, what's the value of religion, of the freedom of belief, when you no longer believe in anything? I mean, you need to do something. You need to be able to do something with these kind of freedoms. When we have nothing to live for, I think that freedom is meaningless. Actually, one of today's biggest tragedies is that, especially in rich countries, there are numerous peoples that are forced to spend their entire working lives doing jobs that they themselves consider to be pointless. I mean, think about jobs like sometimes PR advisors, investment banker, corporate lawyer, and a whole load of administrative positions. There's this brilliant essay that was written by the American anthropologist David Graeber. You may have read it. He calls them bullshit jobs. So these are the jobs that, you know, even the people themselves say, you know, it's not really useful. And we're not talking about just a handful of people here. There was a poll last year in the UK that showed that among Brits, as many as 37% think they have a bullshit job. I mean, this is huge. Isn't there supposed to be some kind of invisible hand that gets rid of all this bullshit? Somehow it's not happening. It's like a former mathematics working at Facebook lamented a few years ago. He said, the best minds of my generation are thinking about how to make people click ads. It's a huge waste of talent that we are seeing here. As I've traveled around for lectures the past few years, I've also met a lot of people who told me they have a part-time bullshit job. This is a really interesting phenomenon. These were consultants, for example, who felt that their work was pointless, but they used the money they earned to do something that's really useful. So, for example, they did work for some kind of organization that was into charity, and they financed that with their consultancy work. Now, in journalism, this is even worse. So what we see is, for example, investigative journalists funding their work by writing editorials for companies they hate, and they use that money then to write investigative reports on those very kinds of companies. So it's completely upside down. We fund the things that we consider of real value, that we find really important, we fund it with bullshit. That's what capitalism looks like nowadays. Really weird. I think that basic income would be a very important tool in ending all this. And I must say, I know that for many people, universal basic income today is as unthinkable as something like women's suffrage or equal rights for racial minorities was in the past. And it's sometimes difficult to imagine that we'll ever be able to shake off that dogma that you have to be forced into work by the threat of starvation. That we are deep down, that human beings are deep down lazy and corrupt. But I think that in the end, you know, the inability to imagine a world in which things are different is only evidence of a poor imagination. You know, it's not evidence of the impossibility of change. It's especially because we are richer than ever now, that we've made so much progress in the past few centuries that we can now afford to give everyone a dividend of progress. The material conditions, I think, are already there. We don't have to wait for robots. We don't have to wait for Silicon Valley. The only thing that's left, I believe, is updating our worldview. And the good news is, this has actually already started. It has not really started yet in the boardrooms of our CEOs, or the newsrooms of our big media, or in the offices of our politicians. But it has already started, you know, where all utopias begin, I think, in ugly halls like these. You know, where people come together and believe that another world is possible. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Rutger, for this very interesting angle of basic income. And maybe just to remind you or inform you about basic income. Basic income is the idea of giving everyone an amount of money from born to death that would be unconditional. And that's what it is interesting about basic income. That can be accumulated with other revenues, and that could actually be an efficient tool to eradicate poverty, among other arguments. So let's now hear our second speaker. His name is Karl Widerquist. He is the co-chair of the BIEN, the Basic Income Earth Network. He's also professor at the SFS Qatar University at Georgetown University, and he has written several books, among which one of his latest books is Independence, Propertylessness, and Basic Income, a theory of freedom as the power to say no. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as we established with the last speaker, basic income has been taking off lately. It used to be, when you talked about basic income, you had to explain to people what it was, and no one had heard of it. And now you can go in most places, and most people have heard about it. And the discussion of it has been at least doubling every year in the last 5 years. Something is going on. Well, I've been reading and writing about basic income since the 20th century. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's going on and how to put this wave of support that basic income is having into a historical perspective. Because what's happening now is the third wave of the basic income movement. And I began to think of what's happening about 2 years ago. I began to think of it as the third wave. And then I was trying, is the third wave larger than the second wave? And now I can firmly, this third wave is much larger. We're in the third and largest wave of the basic income movement. And something is happening. We have a lot to build on. The first wave The first wave, the first wave is early 20th century. Before that, there were people that talked about basic income. You had Thomas Paine saying something like it in the late 1700s, a man named Thomas Spence defining something close to basic income, and a few voices here and there, but so separated you can't define a wave. But the first wave, when there's several different groups at the same time talking about it, begins in the early 20th century, mostly in the English-speaking world, when people like Bertrand Russell, without giving it a name, defined the idea in 1916, writing, "A certain small income, sufficient for necessaries, should be secured to all, whether or they work or not, and a larger income should be given to those who are willing to engage in some work which the community recognizes as useful. On this basis, we may build further." Basic income is not the end of social justice. Basic income is the base for social justice to build on. In this first wave, you got him, Bertrand Russell, you got Virginia Woolf, the author, took a stand for basic income in her famous work, A Room of One's Own. You had people who were involved in the Georgist land tax movement. Some of them favored a basic income as one of the things that they wanted to do with the revenue from the land taxes. There was a state bonus movement in Britain in the 1920s, which was short-lived. In the United States, Senator Huey Long was going to run for president in 1936. He was assassinated before he was able to do so. He had a plan called Share the Wealth, which was very much a basic income plan for everyone. And there was another movement that began in Britain and reached its highest political achievement in Western Canada, called the Social Credit Movement, which combined a national dividend, which was something like a basic income, with some idiosyncratic banking reforms. And these different things were all happening at the same time, and it seemed that the many people who were talking about this in very, very different ways seemed to have no knowledge of each other. So the first wave was a bunch of contradictory ripples that never coalesced into a single wave. Now things began to die down as the welfare state took shape during the Great Depression and during the First World War and immediately after the World War. And the welfare state took the shape of a conditional model of where the state will judge you as you're the good poor, you're the bad poor, you can get a job, we should get you a good job, you can't work. If you can show that you can't work, then we'll support you, and if you can't show that you are unable to work and don't take the work that's available, we will make you homeless and helpless. And that conditional model, some welfare states are very generous and some are very stingy, but almost all of them work on that conditional model, that you have to meet these conditions. It became very popular. Now, the second wave of basic income support came along in the 1960s, and like the third wave, like the wave we're going through now, it seemed to come out of nowhere. It seemed to appear on the scene in the United States and Canada, and to a limited extent in Europe as well. It seemed to appear on the scene from nowhere. Well, actually, various people have been working on it for 20 years before that, but suddenly different people were talking about it. We had a welfare rights movement. People like Martin Luther King endorsed basic income. Now that the Civil Rights Bill had been passed and the Voting Rights Bill had been passed, the most important thing that he and many other people in the Civil Rights Movement saw was the poverty of the black race and anyone else in the low class. And they were turning their attention to that. And there was a lot of activism, and a lot of activists in the welfare rights community were endorsing basic income under the name of guaranteed income. At the same time, a lot of economists were getting involved in it. More than a dozen Nobel Prize-winning economists have endorsed basic income, especially at this time, and they were seeing it as a more scientific solution instead of very cumbersome and the very they're very cumbersome and bureaucratic and sometimes contradictory conditional welfare state that wasted a lot of money judging people. You could expand it and streamline it and make it more cost effective at the same time. And many economists were appealing to that. And some of those economists were actually from a libertarian movement. And also, back then, there were futurists. There were people like Buckminster Fuller and Robert Theobald who were making the automation argument back then, that technology is replacing people's jobs at a more rapid rate. And we need to do something about that. And politicians got involved. It was discussed at very high levels in the United States and Canada. In the United States, a watered-down bill to create something like a guaranteed income passed the House of Representatives twice and was narrowly defeated in the Senate. We almost got it. In 1972, both of the major party nominees in the presidential election endorsed some form of guaranteed income. And it died after Watergate. It died with the Carter administration, and mostly it died with the rise of the neoliberal politicians such as Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, who made so much political hay out of demonizing the poor and are talking about cutting the welfare system. And that sort of entrenched. There were people who were for cutting it and replacing it with nothing, and there were people who were for defending it the way it was, and the idea of reforming it to expand it and make it better was off the table. Now, because of that, because of how it ended, many people think of the second wave, many people in the current basic income movement think of the second wave as a failure. And that is wrong, because a lot of good things came out of the second wave, especially in the United States. 5 experiments were conducted in the United States and Canada. The earned income tax credit and food stamps were both created as offshoots of the guaranteed income movement. They're imperfect policies, but they were a step forward, and they helped people who needed help. And that is what this is all about. And so they didn't help enough people. They didn't help them as much as they needed, but they helped people. So good things came out of it, as well as the Alaska dividend, which is the closest thing to a basic income in the world. Now, then, once again, the discussion seemed to be off the table from the 1980s until maybe the mid to late 2000s. But academics started the discussion. There was actually a growing academic discussion starting in the 1980s. And one by one, around the world, basic income organizations started being founded at the national level, at the supranational level, and now at the subnational level. The regional organizations, local, citywide organizations have sprung up. The academic discussion kept the idea alive. And some activists were involved at this point, but there wasn't a critical mass of people. There wasn't a critical mass of people for activists to really lead action. So most of what the activists were doing was the same thing the academics were doing, which was writing about it. Then, now, if I had to say, when did this start to change, and when did the third wave, when did all this coalesce into something? I would remember in 2006. In 2006, the bishop of the Namibian Lutheran Church stood up at the podium at the Basic Income Earth Network conference and said, "Words, words, words," and slammed his fist on the table. A lot of people say those things, but he actually had something to back it up, and he started a pilot project. He had raised money and started a pilot project in Namibia that gave a basic income to people. And at just about the same time, this guy over here and his wife started a pilot project in Brazil. A few years later, another one got started in India. These things brought attention to the idea wider than just in their country. And then the Great Recession happened. The Occupy movement happened, the Arab Spring happened, and people began to turn their attention to poverty and inequality. And this time, now that this conditional welfare state is at least 50 years old in most countries and over 100 years old in some countries, and it's not delivering what it promised. It's not delivering enough equality and enough relief from poverty. People are starting to rethink the model. What can we do different? So one of the things that has caused this third wave is that although we've been talking about basic income for a long time, now people were ready to listen. Now people are rethinking that model. They're not simply attacking it on one side and defending it as it is on the other. But the voices have come from so many different areas with such little coordination. There's been a left libertarian movement. It's been pretty small, a revival of the Georgist idea from over 100 years ago. To some extent, libertarians are involved, but less so than they used to be. Libertarians have gotten more entrenched in this idea that all redistribution is a violation of the rights of rich people. Some data from the negative income tax experiments was brought up by Evelyn Forget in the University of Manitoba, studying the MINCOME experiment in Manitoba, and coming to this information came to light at the right time, right when it got a lot of media attention. There's also been experience in developing countries. Developing countries have been experienced with different policies. None of them have introduced a true basic income, but they've taken small steps in that direction. You take a step in that direction by reducing the conditions, making conditions easier to fill, and widening the number of people who are eligible. And many developing nations have moved in this direction and find that the easier the conditions are to meet and the wider the benefits of the policy, the better and more effective it is at reducing poverty. And of course, the limit of this would be a basic income, which has no conditions and is a wide policy. And this brought attention to the issue. Following the implementation trials that I talked about, now governments are getting involved, and we're talking about implementation trials in Finland and in Canada and possibly the Netherlands as well. But following the Occupy movement and the 99% movement in the Arab Spring, people are now getting active on basic income. Now, basic income activists introduced citizens' initiatives to get votes on basic income in the European Union, which didn't get enough signatures, and in Switzerland, which did, and this brought attention to the issue. Quantitative easing for the people is something else that has a basic income for it. Environmentalists have hit on a similar idea in the cap and dividend or tax and dividend strategies to global warming, both of which contain something like a basic income. And now journalists, there are a lot of committed journalists who are started out covering the basic income movement, but some of them have become true believers and are writing about it much more than they have to. So from all these different sources, with no one root cause, all these different sources have coalesced at this time to build on this movement. And just the other day, Black Lives Matter endorsed basic income, which is one thing that has been missing. The second wave had a welfare rights movement component, and the third wave until now has not. And that's something it will need. And now we don't know where it's going to go. Because there's been 3 waves doesn't mean inevitably there will be a decline and then a 4th wave. This could be the wave that pushes it over in at least one country. The future is unpredictable. We don't know what can happen. But what we have here is an opportunity. The opportunity, I think, to build on the kind of thing that Rutger was saying, is that we need to paint the conditional welfare state for what it is. It's really a right-wing idea that we don't help the poor unless we judge them. That we, the privileged, consider ourselves capable of sitting in judgment of the poor and saying who deserves what and who doesn't deserve what. And what do the poor have to do to be deserving? They have to work for us. They have to take a job from someone who's so much more privileged than they are that they're capable of giving them a job. That's the conditional welfare. Or they have to prove that they can't do it. That idea in the conditional welfare state is a very right-wing idea and really sides with one side in this. And we have a chance to capture the center if we can get people to realize what that is. And that, I think, is what's one of the important things that's happening with this third wave. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karl. It was a very good way to showing us how basic income has been evolved lately, and it's been also evolving thanks to experiments, as you just said. And one of the good examples is the Brazilian one, and we are very lucky to have with us today Marcus Brancaglione, the president of the association Realists, known for having experimented a basic income in the small town of Coatinga Velho since 2008.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Karl, for your words, because it's very passionate and it's very good to follow that. It's an honor to be here, and I apologize for my English, first of all. And in fact, what Karl says, the main reason to be here, because me and my wife in 2008 start to pay one basic income on a small village for 100 people, and I pretended to explain if the basic income is the great innovation of 21st century, using my glasses, what I learned and experience. But first, I believe somebody knows Coatinga Velho, this experiment in Brazil, hear about that? I believe not. And then I wanted to give us some cool facts and a short briefing about Coatinga Velho. All right. In Brazil, we have a law about basic income since 2004, and a very good law, in fact, a great conquest. And us try very hard in partnership with the government and the companies start one project when the place where you live and make the social work. I run an NPO, and one point everything is stuck, and start searching other places to do that alone, only citizen for citizen, and find that this is a small village called Coatinga Velho. And then started to pay one basic income, go to house by house, talk to the people, in fact, too much crazy, totally insolent, pay, knock on door and asking for people and try to explain it's a right, not a gift, and have a 3 months to explain that, have a meetings in the city, and after that, start to pay basic income only for 27 people living in the city. Many people don't believe it. Even don't have to give nothing back because it's unconditional. Don't believe it. Something behind of that. It's impossible. Another day, one political come or have something hiding. Only after 3 months, the people start to believe it's not a scheme, and they have a very, very good results about basic income. The people started to make their own business, to search and work in other places. It's funny because I have the chance to grow in the bubble in Brazil. Brazil is not a poor but a very unique, desigual. Unique country, and I have good chances in the life. And the Coatinga is a rural place, very poor, and I have I come when I started to do this work. I have a lot of pressures. I'm asking for myself if the people stop to work, if the people, what are the people do with this money, how they change, and after almost 8 years before. Start that, I discover the problem is not them, the problem is me. It's a lot of prejudice. don't dare, I don't need to dare to ask on that, because it's so obvious that people do the better for yourself. When the people receive this money and try to make your life better, sorry. And the most important, even, it's very important to say, the money I give, I not have a proud for this money, because it's a very poor money. It's something like 30 reais, 40 reais, something like 10, 15 dollars, the exchange of time. It's shameful, but it's the best what is possible give it. Like I say, it's a project, independent project, don't have any more governments or companies behind. It's just money to catch for everybody in the world, and that these people give money for us, and then us give directly for those people since 2008. And it's the best money what is possible to give. Even this small money make a lot of difference. A lot of difference. This is very important to say that, because sometimes I heard people talk, a lot of discussions in basic income groups and other discussions, not only basic income but salaries and everything, talk about how the ideal basic income, some don't have one ideal. The first thing is take this right, because the people needed that. After you searching for growing this, it's like one father in our house. No matter if you don't have food for everyone, you put all food you have on the table. And these, when they're looking for, not in one society, civil society project, but if you're looking for the basic income is a right for the people, it's a duty for governments. The government must give everything we have. This discussion is very important, because one of the things, since the beginning when it started, the politicians say for us is, sorry, don't have money. It's a crazy idea, stupid idea. Don't have money. It's after 2008, the crisis, it's obvious, it's lying. It's heavy money. For example, in Brazil, the money in the corruption is much more enough. And the money goes for the war, is much more enough to pay the basic income. In fact, if pick all money and pay the basic income, continues have money to run wars, it's not enough. It's sad. If you start to pay basic income, don't stop war, continues to have money to bomb other places. This is a terrible thing. But it's a good start, you know. Start to accomplish your duty. This have two struggles in the practical way. One is you must fight for the commons, because the government is not the owner to deny the basic income. It's very important, because sometimes, no, don't have money, needed to create a scheme. Stop the talking there. You must pay my basic incomes, belong to us. The public property belongs to the people. No, it's a good government, Lula, Trudeau. Stop the talking. It's not yours. Don't matter it's a seal to take care about the land, or as a president, I don't know what he is. This money belongs to the people. And must pay, no matter it's only single cent, or $1,000. The first point. The second point is, because I'm not an anarchist, I believe in the social responsibility. The second point is everybody needs one basic income. And the great question is, when you talk about basic income, it's a good idea, but like a right. But every right is a duty too. And they ask it, you are assuming this duty. You are disposed to put your hands in the pocket and pay one basic income, share, or give your time for someone poor? This is a very difficult question. Because sometimes, okay, when the rich country have money the public money is enough, but if you think about basic incomes for all, all, not only for all us, Canadians, us, Brazilians, but for all, the humanity. Some places need help and needed to share this money. The humanity is prepared to, I agree, basic income, okay, but pay that, assuming this responsibility. If no one put one gun and say, pay, like in the taxes, this is a very difficult question. And this responds to the great question of this. For the basic income be the great social innovation of the 21st century, we, especially we here in the World Social Forum, must have the courage of this great fascists have in this moment. Trump in this moment go and say, let's persecute the people. And us have the courage to do what the fascists have, to say openly, do what I do now. This is the main question. Have fanatics in the world, don't have shame anymore I would say that, to demonstrate our beliefs. How much us believe in the humanity, how much us believe in one basic income. Because people, when they say about one terrorist or other, have believed too much in your country, your God, to blow, to kill other people or kill yourself. But us, just to share, to say I believe in the humanity, believe enough to do something like that? Oh, less, just to pay. This is one great question. Because just waiting for governments, maybe it's good. Maybe governments stopped to bomb Syria, and everything is going to fine. But the question is, and if don't, who started to change the things? Who comes first? The fascists, the neopopulists? And I say I'm very happy that the basic income grows, because basic income is an incredible tool to make changes in the world. Change for the poverty, change in the freedom, because poverty is not only a material. Poverty is about dignity, freedom. Poverty, one thing I discovered, just to close my presentation, it's very connected of everything I talk about fascism and this new mentality to grow, to get out for the shadows, is what I'm learning, pay one basic income, is the most important form of freedom is the equality. It's don't be submitted for other persons. When you have a conditionality, when you must asking for someone to, don't matter if it's when the working or you receive your social assistance, asking for one authority, the right to live. These relations of power created two types of not citizens, two types of people. This destroy the soul of a person. It's very important when person look for the other in their eyes. And the feeling is a truly equal. Because if you don't feeling is a equal, you are a slave. And the soul is killed. Kill the person inside and create hate. I say that not only to see this. I live in one poor place. I feeling that. Basic income is the most important tool to change the world, especially in this moment. It's not only about convincing other persons. It must be a practical tool, especially for us to work in the social field. This is my my feelings, not only my words. And I swear to you, always, don't matter how much money is, don't have small money, always have some person need more. Don't matter, in south or north, always have one person need more of us. Nobody's poor. Too much poor is not, don't have conditions to help one. It's possible everyone to build one project of basic income. I am nobody, I'm start one. This is my message. Thank you very much.
You said, because Brazil is quite ahead of its time, because it's one of the first countries, or maybe the only country, to have introduced basic income in its constitution. So it's a long-term project, but at least. So we will have now a time of debate. So if you have any questions, there are 2 microphones circulating in the room. So please raise your hands if you have questions, comments, remarks. We'll have like 3 questions at a time and then go to the answers of the speakers.
Hello, does that work? Okay, so thank you so much for I'm here.
Where are you?
Hi. So thank you so much, it was really inspiring and motivating, contrary to my feeds in Facebook every day. But I have a question about the possibility to have utopian maybe society and basic income in bigger societies. So every time that I read about basic income is, on a small scale. And I study philosophy, and every time that I read about possible society where everybody has the minimum to live, Thomas More thinks about a little society, and he talks about like hundreds of people. So do you think that it will work? Like, do we have to change even the scale, and so maybe we cannot live in a city like Montreal anymore, and we have to, reduce the dimension of our society in general? That's the question. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll have a couple of more questions before we answer.
Hi, thanks speakers. My question is a strategy question about implementing minimum revenue. As you said, many economists on the left and the right, and regular people on the left and the right, agree about guaranteed minimum income. Is there a risk about allying with the political right? And what is the strategy that the left should take in trying to implement it? Should we try to amend the country's constitution? What can we do about this? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe a last question?
Yes. No response?
Just after.
Bonjour. C'est juste une remarque. C'est qu'en français, on est plus habitué avec la notion de revenu de citoyenneté au lieu de basic income au Québec, parce qu'il y a un livre écrit là-dessus, entre autres par Chartrand, en 1999. Alors, ça, peut-être tantôt dans les questions, si vous auriez parlé de revenu de citoyenneté, il y aurait eu plus de mains levées, tout simplement.
Shall I say something? I didn't understand the third question because my French is not that good. I didn't pay enough attention in high school. Sorry. But I can say something about the other 2 questions, which were both very good questions. So the first question was, if I understand it correctly, like what can we actually learn from these experiments if they're on a small scale? Well, there are some reasons to think that we don't really know what would happen yet if we introduce a universal basic income nationwide, because it simply has never happened worldwide. So Alaska has a basic income, a sort of a universal basic income, but it's like $1,000 or $2,000 each year, and they fund it from oil dividends, and it works really well, and it's hugely popular. but we don't really have the full universal basic income thing yet. And one of the most important things that would happen if you implemented on a national scale is that many people who now have low incomes and are at the bottom of society, they would have a lot more bargaining power to say no to the jobs that they wouldn't like, and this will mean that their wages will have to increase. And this is an effect that you won't see in the small-scale experiments, because if you just give a basic income to 5,000 people in a labor market of millions, then you won't see that kind of effect. So I think that's actually very important. My personal position is that the experiments are extremely important in raising awareness and just showing to people that, well, if you just get people out of poverty, that they don't turn out to be massively lazy, because this is really what many people still think. And the other question was also really good. Shouldn't we be afraid that the right will seize the idea, like they see so many good ideas, and turn basic income some kind of neoliberal version? And I think this is a true danger. I mean, there are many versions of basic income. I see it personally more as a directional thought, and it all depends on how you would finance it. So I personally think we should finance it in a way that it would reduce inequality, by financing wealth more, or property, or financing it with the dividends from energy resources. But you could also finance it with something like a consumption tax, and then many people won't benefit. Or you could finance it by abolishing large parts of the welfare state. So, for example, in Europe, you could finance it by just getting rid of universal healthcare. Now, I don't think that many people will like that. So, I think that basic income should mostly be a supplement to the welfare state we already have. In the country where I come from, the Netherlands, universal healthcare is pretty good. Universal education is pretty good. But the welfare system we have is awful. You wouldn't believe. It's so humiliating to be in it. So I really see it as a supplement, but maybe others could say something about it as well.
Well, yes, the problem of a left-right alliance was a significant problem in the second wave, and it's one of the reasons that the United States didn't get a negative income tax in the 1970s, is that they found that they couldn't agree on a type of plan that would get all of the supporters from the left and all of the supporters from the right to agree on. Some people on the left dropped out because they thought it was too generous, not generous enough, and some people on the right dropped out because they thought it was too generous and it didn't pass. So, and also it can give you a bad name, and I've had to defend basic income about that. I was speaking on the radio a few weeks ago, and a caller called in and said, I live in San Francisco, I'm getting a housing benefit, and if you take away my housing benefit and give me $12,000 a year, I can't live on that, and I'll be out of my home. It's like, that's not what basic income is about. That's maybe some very right-wing version of a basic income, but that's not what it's about. It's not about redistribution from one poor person to another, but it's about filling in all the gaps in the redistribution we have now so that no one is left out, and it has to be promoted on that basis. Now, I would of course support a basic income at a low level if that's what it took to get it started, with the hope of increasing it later. But there's a danger in that too, is that a small basic income doesn't excite people, and it won't get activists out on the street. And also, small programs might be easier to create, but they're also easier to kill. Britain's baby bond, which was introduced by the Labour government, was the first thing that the Conservatives killed when they got in office, and it was such a low level nobody cared, because it was a gimmicky, small, little nothing program. The idea was increase it later. Well, later didn't come. So you have a tough trade-off. It's easier to pass if it's smaller, but it's much, in some ways, there's less resistance to it, but there's also less excitement for it. And you've got to get a plan that's going to be solid and strong in the long run. It's got to be something that's significant to people. You've got to give people a plan that say, I got to get behind this and defend this. So I think the strategy of going for a full basic income might well be the right thing. And you get also the right side of basic income is much smaller. And the second wave, it was very much a left-right alliance. The third wave is very much from the left. There's the right people, the people from the right that want to reform the welfare state and make it more cost-effective, have been thrilled with the Reagan and Thatcher idea of just getting rid of it entirely. So there's really not, the right, it's not so much a left-right alliance today as it was in the past.
The small scale, about the small scale, it's possible to, you implemented a large project, use the small communities. If you implement a network, a lot of small communities, connected network spread in one large region. Is possible to do that in the national territory, or do that in the international process. This is very good to connect many different experiments. Is very important, for example, in this moment, for connected different experiments, maybe create a great international connection between all experiments. It's very important to spread, create this critical mass the Karl talking about is very important, I believe it.
Can I say one more thing I just remembered,
Sure.
which I think is very important? What I think that's the case for many people, at least from my generation, is that they see the basic income not really as a left or a right-wing policy, but something that goes beyond that. So it's left-wing in the sense that it's about massive redistribution, right? So you would essentially eradicate poverty. But maybe you could see it as right-wing in the sense that it's very anti-nanny state, it's very anti-government paternalism, that people would be allowed to make their own choices, what they want to do with their lives. And another more maybe economic or right-wing argument for it is that I personally see basic income really as an investment. So often we on the left, we talk about anti-poverty measures often in terms of costs, that that we're talking about people that have to be helped. But this is what many people resent about the left, this paternalism that people don't like. And I think it's an investment. There's quite a lot of studies that show that poverty is simply too expensive. For example, child poverty in the US, the costs are $500 billion each year. Now, it would cost about $175 billion to eradicate poverty completely. So, there's no bigger return on investment than if you give $1 to a homeless person or a poor person, because the welfare state as we have it now is just so hugely ineffective and expensive.
Donc vous aviez posé la question du revenu de citoyenneté. En fait, je pense que c'est important aussi de préciser qu'on a plusieurs terminologies autour et de propositions en fait autour de la question du revenu de base. Nous, on parle de revenu de base au MFRB principalement du fait que la traduction anglaise basic income se traduit par revenu de base, mais on a aussi d'autres propositions qui parlent d'allocation universelle, de revenu existence, etc., etc. Je pense que le point commun, en tout cas, entre toutes ces propositions, peu importe leur terminologie, c'est vraiment cette idée d'un montant qui soit universel, inconditionnel, inaliénable. C'est là vraiment où on trouve toute l'essence en fait de l'idée. Et après, bon, effectivement, il y a plusieurs terminologies. Du coup, on va peut-être enchaîner sur les questions, sinon on ne va pas y arriver. Où sont les micros?
Ici.
Super.
Alors, bonsoir. J'habite tout près. J'habite l'arrondissement Verdun à Montréal. Je salue tout le monde qui vient au Québec pour pouvoir parler d'un sujet aussi important. Alors, ce que je voulais dire, juste quelques mots sur le fait qu'ici au Québec, effectivement, dans les années 2000, il y avait le revenu de citoyenneté. Et je ne peux pas passer à côté d'un grand syndicaliste qui est mort, qui s'appelle Michel Chartrand, et qui a mis de l'avant un manifeste pour un revenu de citoyenneté. Il y a de ça dans les années 2000. Une expérience gouvernementale, c'est-à-dire, oui, gouvernementale, parce que le gouvernement au Québec avait quand même mis une loi anti-pauvreté, suite à un mouvement qui a duré peut-être de 2003 à 2013, un mouvement anti-pauvreté aussi. Et quelle a été la conclusion? J'ai sauté sur un document qui fait un peu le bilan synthèse de ces 10 années, de ce mouvement qui voulait anti-pauvreté, pendant que Michel Chartrand revendiquait un manifeste, c'est-à-dire pour un revenu de citoyenneté. Pendant ces 10 années, il y a eu un vide total. On n'en a pas parlé du revenu de citoyenneté. On a parlé, par contre, d'abolir la pauvreté. Et qu'est-ce qu'on a mis de l'avant avec les gouvernements? C'est un revenu minimum garanti. Un revenu minimum. Et cette situation a fait que le gouvernement n'a pas été... Ça a été un échec, autrement dit, pour ce mouvement-là, qui voulait qu'il n'y ait plus de pauvreté. C'est une leçon importante à savoir que si on veut avoir une protection pour nos biens, parce que je suis encore pauvre, j'ai été pauvre toute ma vie, et j'en suis pas responsable, il y a des circonstances. Eh bien, pour en sortir de cette pauvreté, ce revenu de citoyenneté, il faut qu'il revienne sur la table depuis ces 10-12 dernières années. Et ce qu'il faut, c'est assurer un bien-être, être heureux, c'est-à-dire manger, se loger, les biens de base. Et bien sûr, des services publics gratuits. Gratuits, on a l'argent pour le financer. Donc, ce fameux minimum, là, hein, parce que le mouvement en question, il revendiquait un mouvement, un revenu plancher. Pourquoi c'est pas un revenu du ciel? Plancher, ciel. Donc, tout était prémédité en quelque sorte, et j'en veux pas ces mouvements qui sont battus avec le... Mais le gouvernement, il n'a pas embarqué. Et là, je rejoins mon collègue du Brésil. Ça ne marchera pas avec les gouvernements. Qui servent-ils, les gouvernements? Ils servent le 1% les plus riches. Et il faut aller chercher cet argent. Il faut se battre, monsieur. Je suis d'accord avec vous. Il faut délocaliser, partir d'un mouvement qui serait mondial. Et ça arrive chez moi, dans le sud-ouest, à Verdun.
Alors, il y a une question là-haut.
Oui, merci. Vous avez évoqué à plusieurs reprises que le revenu universel ou revenu de base, ça a pour but fondamental, d'une part, de réduire la pauvreté, d'éliminer la pauvreté et de réduire les inégalités. Moi, je viens de France, on est très engagé dans les actions sociales et effectivement, il est très important au niveau, en tout cas de la lutte contre la pauvreté, d'aller beaucoup plus loin qu'aujourd'hui dans l'augmentation du revenu minimum, dans le fait de le rendre automatique, sans difficulté d'accès, pour résoudre tous les problèmes de non-accès que l'on a actuellement, et de le rendre aussi stable et donc très facile à obtenir. C'est un peu ce que vous appelez l'inconditionnalité. Je suis moins convaincu par l'idée qu'on réduit la pauvreté en l'élargissant à toute la population, donc en donnant autant aux plus riches qu'aux plus pauvres. Voilà, je crains une dispersion des fonds et le fait que ça ne réduise pas les inégalités, puisqu'on les maintient. Il faut des politiques volontaristes pour réduire les inégalités. Donc je crois qu'il y a vraiment un enjeu à réfléchir aux conséquences aussi des inégalités et avoir un travail plus audacieux, me semble-t-il, sur ce point-là, par une politique fiscale qui réduise les inégalités nettement plus, et par le fait que le revenu universel soit financé non pas tant, comme je l'entends souvent dans les financements et dans les projets, par le détricotage, la déconstruction de la protection sociale, ce qui me semble un vrai danger, mais plutôt par de nouvelles politiques fiscales et de nouvelles politiques, disons, trouvant des financements sur ceux qui ont gagné le plus à la mondialisation. Donc voilà, je crois qu'on est tous d'accord sur la nécessité de politiques beaucoup plus audacieuses pour combattre la pauvreté. Je ne suis pas sûr que disperser les fonds sur tout le monde soit la meilleure façon d'y arriver, ou alors il faut vraiment penser des politiques de maintien et de protection de la protection sociale, ainsi que des politiques fiscales très différentes.
Merci pour ce témoignage. On va prendre deux autres questions. Peut-être juste, j'en profiter pour préciser quand même, qu'au MFRB, et je pense que c'est la même chose au Revenu de base Québec. L'idée du revenu de base, c'est vraiment, ça vient vraiment pour renforcer la protection sociale et non pas pour la détricoter. Donc c'est quand même important de préciser ça. Alors, les questions... Où sont les micros? Là.
Il y en a trop à la fois. On prend déjà la première vague. S'il y a 40 mains qui se lèvent, on ne pourra pas donner le micro à tout le monde.
Bah là, pour l'instant, il n'y avait qu'une seule question.
On a déjà des noms d'avance. On pose 2 questions et on aura un autre.
Okay, well, then we can react now.
The comment wasn't translated because it wasn't spoken into the microphone.
Oui. Je commence. Oui.
Shall I say something about...
Effectivement, c'est une idée, un principe extrêmement séduisant. Je m'y intéresse depuis 6-7 ans. J'ai par contre un problème de perspective. Actuellement, effectivement, dans le contexte actuel où nous sommes riches parce que nous exploitons énormément les ressources en Afrique et on utilise la main-d'œuvre à pas cher en Asie, dans une perspective où on risque d'avoir un ralentissement, des crises sur différents domaines. Est-ce que c'est juste quelque chose de temporaire, tant qu'on peut? Est-ce qu'il ne faut pas le voir aussi dans je crois que vous appelez ça une sobriété volontaire, c'est-à-dire comment faire pour se ralentir la consommation, ralentir l'ensemble du système? Le problème, il est qu'avec la pression des tensions internationales, un pays qui se ralentit trop devient aussi la proie des forces économiques prédatrices, on va dire. C'est très raccourci, je suis désolé.
Merci. Alors, we will get to the answers, reactions.
The problem with the left, in many senses today, is that it knows very well what it is against. So we're anti-austerity, we're anti-establishment, anti-racism, anti-homophobia, etc. And I'm all anti all those things. I mean, I completely agree. But the question is also, what are we actually for? So some people say, well, the problem is consumerism. I personally don't think that the problem is consumerism and that we should be anti-consumerism and that we should move in the direction of sobriety or something like that. I think the real problem is that we just consume the wrong stuff. So we consume all kinds of things that we don't really like, you know. We work jobs we hate, to buy stuff we hate, to impress people we don't like, you know, that's sort of our... So the problem isn't so much with consumerism, the problem is that we consume the wrong things. We should just do other things with the incredible productivity that machines and the progress of the past 200 years have provided for us. So I think that's very important. I also think it's very important to have an optimistic, or at least a story that people will get enthusiastic about it. And if your only story is, well, the world is falling apart and, well, your income is going to drop, but that's necessary, then I don't think you'll have a huge following. So I think that's important to remember. And the other thing is a question that comes up very often. People ask, why would the rich receive a basic income as well? Now, I'm from Europe. Maybe it's a little easier for me to understand because there's a very important difference between Northern European welfare states and, for example, the welfare state that the US and the UK have. The US and the UK have much more targeted welfare systems of welfare. In the Netherlands, where I come from, it's very much universal. So universal healthcare, everyone gets free education, even if you're rich. And also, if you're unemployed, it doesn't really matter how high your income has been or how many wealth you have. You'll get unemployment benefits as well. And what's the great strength of this system is that it has a huge legitimacy. So there's been a lot of research that these universal systems are in the end much more effective at reducing poverty than the targeted systems, because you'll have to convince the middle class as well. You know, it's very important that we don't just talk about anti-poverty measures, that we don't just talk about people who are, you know, somehow at the bottom of society. Universal basic income really is a policy for everyone, and then you also can create a much larger following, I think, for such an idea. And to close that comment, of course, that doesn't depend that the rich won't pay for basic income. I mean, they will. Maybe you'll finance like 6 or 7 basic incomes for someone else, and you'll receive only one in return. I mean, it all depends on how you finance it, that's for sure. But if you wanted to increase the legitimacy of such a system, I think it has to be universal.
Yeah, let me speak on this issue as well. That's a reason to have universal benefits. The reason to oppose universal benefits is an illusion. There's an illusion that a universal basic income is somehow more expensive than a targeted program. Because it's so expensive to give money to everybody, but that's really not what's happening. I can demonstrate that. Let's say that these people in this section, on that side of the aisle, those are the poor people, and all the rest of you in the back and in these 2 sections, you're the rich people. And we're gonna take money from you so that we can give $1 to each of these people. And so we've done that. And then we say, okay, now we want to take money from you guys so we can give you guys $1 too. So we're going to take money from you. We're going to give it back to you. Well, how much ends up in your pocket when we're done with what we're doing? What is the difference of what ends up in your pocket? It's the same. Most of the cost of that universal program is you're giving money back to the very people you tax it from. And that does not cost them money. What you have to look at to find out how much a basic income costs is the net redistributive effect. How much money is going from this group to that group? That's the cost. Everything else is an exaggeration. Now there is a transaction cost. There is some cost to how much money, what does it cost us to take money from you and give it back to you? But there's also a transaction cost to figure out who are these people? Who are the poor people, and how do we know we're getting all the right poor people? And how do we know if this person here suddenly becomes poor and is part of this group, how do we get the money? How do we know that we get the money to her in time? Those are costs too. And if you actually look at the transaction costs, the transaction costs are actually lower. It is cheaper to have a basic income than it is to have a targeted program. And so a very good reason to do it is these solidaristic reasons that he's talking about, and there really is no good reason to oppose it if you want to help them. And we have a saying, or there's a saying that I've heard passed around on this, is that benefits for the poor are almost invariably poor benefits. If we see it, we can always demonize those people. Oh, those are bad people over there. Those are bad people, but if it's for everyone, you can't demonize everyone.
I wanted to say something about that too. It's a very important to discuss the ways to finance everything, but let me give one word how to sound for me and for one person to live in the poverty, to know the poverty. It's like talk about when you talk about the how to finance it is give more debt or to give more for the other. It's like talk about for me a cannibalism. Is cannibalism is a more cheap or not more cheap or is working better in this way? It's not one thing. It's become more cheap. You do it or not do it. It's something cultural. It's something. It's incredible, say, about that. The transformation is cultural about basic income. If the persons have the right to survive, don't matter if it's poor, rich, don't matter if the cost of the system or not. The question we're talking about is, in the 20th century, have societies believe the civilized, see people dying, because we monopolize every commons in the world. This is the question we're talking about. Nobody goes on the street and takes shit in the middle of the street because it's more expensive and more expensive. Don't do that because it's civilized. This is the point. People die in some places. This looking for here. Who is descended for black people here? who's sending for Indians. This must thinking on the other hand in this point. When they say it's the rich, that come for rich, many companies go for China, and this government sell your own people, like slavery. Don't talk about the one salary. Talk about slavery sell because they don't have good laws for workers. Should have a richness, not only and here. In Brazil too, Brazil is very good. Have a lot of rich people in Brazil. When he talk about social investment, I present the project like a social investment, truly a social investment. The rich people is possible put money in the permanent fund and they receive profit to give basic income. The question is, the rich people knows much better the effects of one basic income events. He knows the revolutionary is give back the right to the people to survive. When one person not have any more to work, not work for others. When talk about the work, everybody think it. I need to work. The problem is when they think about I need to work, it's connected automatically. I need to work for somebody. And the poor places, I need to work for somebody. If I don't do that, I die. It's just like that. And this process, I agree, Rutger, it's obvious the society is evolved. But for some kind of people, some kind of nations, the capitalism is a holocaust because it disappears. If you're looking for many languages, many families, if you're looking for the richness of genius of the people, many people disappears. For he have these better conditions, just working, born and die without capital. When they talk about income, connect to the capital, it's not only cash transfer or transfer richness, must be started to talk about again capital. If we have the right to be an income, it's because the capital, the property belongs to us. This is the point.
Thank you, Marcus.
Nobody spoke to the question about replacing other programs. There are some programs that you could replace. You don't need if you've got a basic income that's 150% of the poverty line and you've got unemployment insurance that's 100%, 150% of the poverty line, you don't necessarily need something that's going to make an unemployed person at 300% of the poverty line. There are some things you can replace, but you can't replace anything that's going to make the people near the bottom worse off. The idea is to redistribute from the wealthy to the poor, not from some of the poor to the other poor.
Thank you. We'll have the last round of questions right now. I know there's people over there, then one over there, and maybe one in the middle, and then I promise we will stay in the area if you have more questions. So please don't be frustrated. Right.
Oui. Pour la stratégie d'implantation du revenu universel, que pensez-vous de lancer l'idée d'un revenu universel directement au niveau mondial, mais de façon réaliste, c'est-à-dire ciblé sur les plus pauvres de la planète, quasiment les plus pauvres, et bien identifiés, qui est la population des réfugiés. Alors c'est réaliste parce que les États ont déjà une obligation de s'occuper d'eux, les financements sont déjà là, c'est simplement la forme qui prendrait la forme du revenu universel. Alors, juste pour finir, je vois deux avantages à cette stratégie. D'une part, d'amener le débat sur le revenu universel au niveau des institutions internationales, ce qui n'est pas encore le cas. Et deuxièmement, d'en profiter pour organiser une coalition des mouvements pour le revenu universel à travers le monde, qui trouverait une tribune pour pouvoir s'organiser, parler d'une même voix. Donc ce n'est pas qu'une stratégie d'implantation réaliste, c'est aussi une stratégie de communication et de prise de pouvoir.
Merci. Alors, une question au milieu.
I have a two-part question. Number one, I heard that over 100 people that were supposed to come here weren't able to come because they didn't get visas, and I was wondering if the South African woman who was going to come was one of them. I think the names and countries should be on the website and posted. It's a crime. In the United States, we would not be able to have a World Social Forum like this because we would have such a huge problem getting visas. Not everybody from the United States or Canada knows. I was shocked that Canada has the same kind of problems that we do of getting people in. That's number one. Number two, I heard that in Switzerland, the proposal, which I think should be said, was about 3,000 Swiss francs per adult per month, and about 650 Swiss francs per child per month. To me, that is so exciting and so huge, and the rich would pay for it. Every single person, regardless of income, was supposed to get that money, but like you said, the rich would be paying maybe 1 million francs, or I don't know. You know, they'd be paying huge francs a month, and they'd get a pittance, and it would really redistribute, no, not so, but it would, I think, really redistribute the wealth, and I think letting people imagine that kind of basic income. Now, I know it went down to huge defeat. Even the unions were opposed to it, which I think was also criminal, but anyway, I just wanted to, give people this idea, and if my facts are wrong, let me know.
Okay, just maybe a short reaction from the Swiss representative we have here, but very short, please.
Oui, je peux vous répondre en tant que Suisse, vu que j'étais impliqué dans la campagne. Premièrement, ce n'est pas une défaite, dans la mesure où c'est la première votation sur le revenu de base. Et si chaque Suisse qui a voté oui convainc un autre Suisse de voter oui, nous gagnons. Donc ce n'est pas une défaite, c'est une étape. Deuxièmement, ici j'ai la prochaine votation initiative fédérale qui s'appelle monnaie pleine. Elle comprend une sorte de revenu de base qui est un quantitative easing, une facilité bancaire pour tous les Suisses, où on prévoit avec la monnaie pleine que l'argent est donné gratuitement, sans intérêt, à tous les habitants de la Suisse. Dans le projet monnaie pleine. Lorsqu'on a découvert, et là je demande aux conférenciers peut-être de réagir sur ce qu'on a découvert dans la campagne suisse, la grande question, c'est le financement. Et ce qu'on a découvert, c'est que simplement, en reprenant le contrôle des créations monétaires, des banques commerciales, qui créent l'argent du néant par milliers de milliards, si on reprend le contrôle des créations monétaires, qui actuellement tout l'argent dans le monde circule sous forme de dette intérêt, et c'est une horreur, une abomination, c'est une stupidité. Si on reprend le contrôle de la création monétaire, on a largement de quoi payer plus que les montants confortables qu'on avait définis dans la campagne. Et en plus, si jamais toutes les créations monétaires ne suffisaient pas pour couvrir ce que je vous ai dit, mais ça couvre largement parce qu'on a plus de 100 000 milliards de flux monétaires par année en Suisse. Donc si vous prenez une miette, en 0, quelque chose, sur les flux financiers qu'il y a en Suisse, si la reprise de la création monétaire ne suffirait pas, simplement sur les flux financiers, vous prenez une miette, ça suffirait largement pour supprimer tous les impôts, privés, personnels, d'entreprises, d'héritage, etc. Plus personne ne doit remplir une déclaration d'impôt. Et là, je rejoins notre ami brésilien. À ce moment-là, nous, les Suisses, on dit, nous sommes le souverain, nous sommes le roi. Un roi ne remplit pas une déclaration d'impôt. Donc, en reprenant la création monétaire, le premier devoir d'un roi, c'est de battre monnaie. Battre monnaie, ça veut dire faire sa monnaie. Puis la deuxième chose, un roi ne va pas payer un impôt à qui que ce soit, c'est lui le roi. Donc, nous, les Suisses, on est tous des rois. Et à ce moment-là, on n'est plus des esclaves. On a, au lieu d'un béret, une couronne. Et puis, on prend le contrôle de la création masse monétaire. Donc, c'est des milliers de milliards. On a découvert l'argent suisse, le franc suisse, qui est tellement fort qu'on prend des intérêts négatifs sur la création, sur les placements en Suisse. Il est tellement fort, il va devenir encore plus fort. Et puis, on ne crée que 65 milliards de francs suisses de papier, de billets de banque. Et des milliers de milliards sont créés par chaque nanoseconde sont créés par les banques commerciales. Donc il faut reprendre, le monde entier doit reprendre la création monétaire, et je vous encourage de nous soutenir pour qu'on vote oui à monnaie pleine. Vous pouvez regarder sur Internet, Positive Money, Vollgeld, Moneta Intera, monnaie pleine en français. Donc je vous ai dit un peu les langues véhiculaires. Vous regardez sur Internet monnaie pleine, ça aide le revenu de base directement.
Merci beaucoup. Préciser également peut-être, j'en profite aussi pour préciser que le MFRB fait partie de la campagne française de Quantitative Easing for the People. Voilà, un peu de pub. Donc il reste une dernière question et après on clôt le débat.
A comment from a worker in the NGO sector. I'm coming from Caritas France. In the humanitarian practice, there was an evolution in the same direction, from food for work to cash for work and to cash distribution, which is non-conditioned. But in practice, it is still targeted to most vulnerable people. And then a few questions. First, what would be the steps to generalize the basic income to a global scale? Second, if we spread it at a global scale, wouldn't it create a currency devaluation? And then wouldn't this need other measures such as the end of tax havens or the things that other people just voiced?
Thank you. Who wants to start?
Okay, I guess I'll start. I'd love to see a world strategy. I do not know how to build one, but I would be glad to join one. If somebody is planning one, you need a speaker, I'll be there. The question about currency devaluation is really the same thing as the question of will basic income create inflation. And there's nothing special about basic income. Basic income is government spending. It's not a special kind of government spending. All government spending creates inflationary pressure. If you have a big increase in government spending, all else equal, without increasing taxes or borrowing more money, you will call it inflation, depending on the economic conditions. But taxes and taking out debt create deflationary pressure. If you got too much inflationary pressure, then you need to draw it back by raising taxes. So if you have a proper balance between taxes and spending, and you're reacting to economic conditions, government spending does not need to cause inflation, and that's as true as if government spending is the form of basic income as anything else. Now, Switzerland, the other question about Switzerland. Yes, Switzerland had a very generous basic income, and it got a lot of excitement on one side, and it got some resistance on the other side because it was basically, the actual number was not written into the proposal. That was the number that the activists behind it talked about. And I think to remember about the Swiss thing is it was an enormous success. 10 years ago, there was zero movement for basic income, zero noticeable one at the national scale in Switzerland. Today, everyone in Switzerland knows what it is, and they went from 0 to 23% of the population. They only need 51%. So they're almost halfway to their goal, and they're just at the beginning of this movement. And they brought so much attention worldwide that the global movement that we all should be a part of, the global movement owes a big thank you to Switzerland for doing it.
What's interesting, I learned this a few weeks ago. Someone told me that there was also a referendum in Switzerland, correct me if I'm wrong, in the 60s about the question whether, it was also a very utopian proposal, whether women should have the right to vote. And it was actually turned down. So a majority was against that idea. And a decade later or something like that, there was another referendum and women got the right to vote. So it's free time. So I think this is such a great example, that every milestone of civilization starts as a utopian fantasy. And everything that we consider completely normal nowadays was once regarded as bizarre, unaffordable, unrealistic. And I think it's just the same with basic income.
you for your attention. That was a good word to end up this debate. Just maybe we can say that if you still want to talk with our speakers, we will be in the hall. There's also more information on our website, so in the MFRB and RBQ's websites. We have leaflets here if you want more information about basic income. And I want also to thank a lot the interpreters who've been doing a great job, I'm sure about it. That's very difficult.
If you would like to volunteer for the Basic Income Earth Network, please contact me. If you can spell my name, you know my email address, carl@widerquist.com.
Or you will find it in the leaflet.